The night I found out, I made him dinner. I want you to sit with that for a moment before I explain it, because I know how it sounds. I know the version of this story where a woman discovers her husband's affair and throws plates at walls and screams and calls her best friend and cries until she can't breathe. I know that version. I have lived inside that version in my imagination 1,000 times since. What I actually did was close the browser on his laptop, put it back exactly where I had found it, go downstairs to the kitchen, and make the chicken marsala he had requested that morning when he kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. I set the table. I lit the candles we kept for special occasions because we were out of the regular ones. I poured 2 glasses of the Merlot he preferred. I stood at the stove and stirred and seasoned and timed it correctly, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me in its coldness, I am going to need 6 months. He came home at 6:45. He kissed me on the cheek the same way he had kissed me that morning. He said the kitchen smelled incredible. He sat down at the table I had set and poured himself more wine and told me about his day. And I smiled at my husband and I listened and I ate the dinner I had made and I thought about everything I had just seen on his laptop and I counted backward from 6 months and I decided that tonight was the beginning. My name is Wren Calloway Bishop. I am 40 years old. And what I am about to tell you is the story of the most deliberate 6 months of my life. Let me tell you who I was before that Tuesday evening in October, because who you are before a thing happens determines everything about how you move through it. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the only child of a father who was an estate attorney and a mother who ran the most organized household I have ever encountered. My mother kept files on everything. Insurance documents, warranty cards, receipts organized by category and year, a running inventory of everything of financial significance in the house. She did not do this from anxiety. She did it from philosophy. She believed that the people who are protected in this life are the people who treat their affairs with the seriousness they deserve before anything goes wrong. I absorbed this the way children absorb the deep assumptions of their households, not as a lesson but as a fact of how the world worked. I studied finance at the University of Georgia. Spent 8 years in corporate treasury management at 2 different firms before transitioning, at 32, into independent financial consulting. My specialty was liquidity analysis, understanding the real, accessible, usable financial position of an entity, as opposed to what its balance sheet claimed at a surface level. I was good at it because I understood that the gap between what something appeared to be worth and what it was actually worth was almost always the most important number in the room. I met Callum Bishop when I was 33. He was 38, a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company, charming in the specific way of men who have spent careers persuading people. He was funny and handsome and attentive in the early stages in the way that, I understand now, he was attentive in the early stages of everything. We dated for 2 years. We got married at 35. We bought a house in Charlotte, North Carolina, a 5-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood that said something about where we were in life. We had plans. The plans included children, though that conversation had grown complicated and then carefully avoided over the 4 years of our marriage. What I did not know, through the 2 years of dating and the 4 years of marriage, was that Callum's attentiveness had a shelf life. That the man who remembered every preference and noticed every detail and made you feel like the only person in the room did those things with a particular woman until she was fully secured, and then redirected those skills toward the next acquisition. He was good at acquiring people. He was not good at sustaining them. I did not know this until the Tuesday evening in October when I went to find his laptop to check a restaurant's website and instead found an email thread that had been open in his browser since that morning. A thread between Callum and a woman named Justine Ferrara, who was a sales representative at one of his company's regional partners, that had been ongoing for 14 months and that removed, completely and without ambiguity, any possible innocent interpretation. 14 months. We had been married for 4 years. 14 months meant it had started in year 3. It meant it had been running through our last anniversary. Through the holiday we spent with his parents in December. Through the weekend trip we had taken in the spring that I had thought was a turning point in our connection and that I now understood had been, for him, something he was managing around rather than participating in. I stood in his home office and I read the thread. Then I closed the laptop. Then I went downstairs and made chicken marsala. I want to explain the 6 months decision because I think it is the part people understand least when I tell this story. It was not, as some people have assumed, about revenge. It was not about punishing Callum or making him suffer or engineering some dramatic exposure. I am a financial consultant. I think in terms of positions and outcomes and the distance between where you are and where you need to be. The 6 months was a calculation, not a performance. Here's what I understood standing in that kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October. The house was jointly owned. Callum and I had purchased it 4 years ago for $810,000. The current market value was approximately $1.1 million. The mortgage balance was $470,000. Our equity was therefore somewhere in the neighborhood of $630,000, split in theory equally between us. Our joint investment accounts held approximately $340,000, accumulated across 4 years of 2 professional salaries. My separate financial accounts, the ones I had maintained independently throughout the marriage, the inheritance from my grandmother that I had deliberately kept in my own name, the retained earnings from my consulting practice that I had always run through a business account rather than a joint personal account, held a figure I knew precisely because I reviewed it every month. Callum's income went primarily into our joint accounts. Mine had always been more distributed. Not secretly. He knew I had a business account. He knew I had an inheritance account. He had simply never paid close attention to the numbers in those accounts because he had never imagined those accounts would one day be the architecture of my independence. He thought of my financial organization as a personality quirk. It was, in fact, a structural advantage I was about to need. What the 6 months was for, finding a divorce attorney and building a complete case before he knew I was filing. Documenting every asset, joint and separate, so thoroughly that nothing could be obscured or relocated before the process began. Building my own liquidity to the point where I could sustain myself and the legal process without depending on joint accounts he could restrict. Consulting with a financial analyst specializing in marital asset division. Establishing my own credit profile independently. Making sure that when I walked into a lawyer's office and said I want to file for divorce, I walked in with a briefcase full of everything rather than a broken heart and nothing else. I had watched clients, over years of consulting work, make financial decisions in emotional states that cost them significantly. I had watched people act before they were ready and pay for it. I was not going to act before I was ready. And I was not ready on a Tuesday evening in October with the chicken marsala on the stove. I would be ready in 6 months. The math was that simple. The discipline required to execute it was considerably harder. The first month was the hardest. Not because of anything Callum did. He was exactly as he had always been, which was itself the unbearable thing. He came home at reasonable hours. He was affectionate in the casual way of a long-married man, the small daily touches that I now understood existed alongside something he was hiding rather than instead of it. He made plans with me for the holidays. He talked about a trip we should take in the spring. He did not know I knew. And I had to live inside that gap, between what he believed I knew and what I actually knew, every single day. I developed a practice for it. Every morning before he woke up, I sat in the small reading chair in the corner of our bedroom and I spent 20 minutes doing what I can only describe as accounting. Not financial accounting. Personal accounting. A deliberate, daily reckoning with what I was doing and why and whether I could continue to do it. I asked myself each morning, is this still the right decision? The answer was always yes. Because every day that passed was another day of documentation. Another day of building the independent financial position that would let me leave cleanly. Another day of research, of consultations with advisors I saw during lunch hours or on working from home days when Callum was at the office, of building the architecture of my exit with the same methodical patience I brought to every complex financial engagement. I also, in the first month, did something that I had not planned but that became essential. I told my mother. Not my friends. Not my sister. Not anyone in the social circle Callum and I shared. Just my mother, who drove from Savannah to Charlotte on a Thursday, ostensibly to help me with a project, and sat at my kitchen table while Callum was at work and listened to everything I had found and everything I had decided. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How much time do you need?" 6 months, I said. She nodded. Like it was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. Like her daughter calculating the runway required to exit a marriage correctly was simply the right approach to a serious problem. "What do you need from me?" she asked. I told her. She stayed for 4 days. She helped me start the documentation process. She reviewed the financial inventory I was building. She brought the specific organizational discipline she had applied to every important matter in her own life and she applied it to mine. She did not cry in front of me until she was leaving, standing at the front door with her overnight bag, and then only briefly, and then she straightened and said, "You are going to be completely fine." I believed her. I had to. Before I go further, if this story is landing somewhere real for you, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let's keep going because what I built over those 6 months is the part that matters most. Month 2. I retained an attorney. Her name was Diana Voss. 48 years old, 16 years specializing in high-asset divorce cases in the Charlotte metropolitan area. She had the specific quality that I had learned to recognize in the best professionals I'd worked with over a career in finance, the ability to hear a complex situation, identify the essential elements, and map a path through it without either minimizing the difficulty or being paralyzed by it. I brought her everything I had from month 1. The asset inventory. The documentation of our joint accounts and their current balances. My separate financial records. A detailed accounting of the contributions each of us had made to the marital estate, financial contributions, yes, but also the less quantifiable ones. The consulting practice I had partially scaled back during year 2 of the marriage when Callum had asked me to travel less and be home more. The client relationships I had not pursued. The professional opportunities one had declined. Diana reviewed everything. She asked questions that were precise and sometimes uncomfortable and that I answered completely because there was no advantage in being incomplete. Then she told me the most important thing anyone told me during those 6 months. The strongest position in a divorce is an informed one, she said. Not just about your own finances, about all of them. Joint accounts, his separate accounts, the business accounts, the retirement accounts, the deferred compensation he has from the company stock program. I'm aware of some of those, I said. Not all. By the time we file, you need to be aware of all of them. I nodded. And the affair, she said. North Carolina is an at-fault divorce state. Documented evidence of infidelity affects the division of assets. If you have evidence, I need to know about it. All of it. I told her about the email thread. She was quiet for a moment. Is there more? I've been documenting since October, I said. I'll show you. Month 2 into month 3, the documentation of the affair. I want to be precise about what I did and what I did not do, because the line matters legally and personally. I did not hack into Callum's accounts. I did not install tracking software. I did not hire someone to follow him. What I did was observe, record, and preserve what was visible to me in the normal course of my life in that house. His phone was occasionally visible. Not accessed by me, visible. I noted dates, times, the observable pattern of his behavior. The late evenings that occurred on a cycle I could map. The business trips that lined up, when I later researched Justine Ferrara's professional conference schedule, with a specificity that was not coincidental. I also found, in the filing cabinet in his home office where he kept work-related documents, 2 credit card statements from a card I had not known existed. The statements covered 8 months. The charges on them told a story that was detailed and specific and entirely documented. I photographed everything. Carefully. With timestamps. I gave Diana the photographs. She looked at them for a long time. This is comprehensive, she said. I've had 3 months, I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression I had come to recognize, something between professional respect and personal admiration that she kept carefully behind the professional register. 3 more months, she said. You're doing this right. Months 3 and 4, the financial architecture. Diana worked with a forensic accountant she trusted, a woman named Greta Park, who specialized in marital asset tracing, to build a complete picture of our financial situation. Everything we jointly owned. Everything Callum solely owned. Everything I solely owned. The history of financial flows between accounts. The valuation of the house, the investment accounts, the retirement accounts, Callum's deferred compensation, his company stock options, some of which were vested and some of which were not, which was its own complex analysis. What Greta found, in month 4, was something Diana had suspected and I had not. Callum had been diverting money. Not dramatically. Not in amounts that would trigger obvious alerts. Small consistent transfers, over roughly 18 months, from our joint investment account to an account I had not known existed. The total diverted was approximately $68,000. I sat in Diana's office when she told me and felt something that was neither surprise nor satisfaction but a kind of cold, complete clarity. Like a financial model that has been running with an unknown variable finally having that variable identified. The picture that had been almost coherent was now fully coherent. He had been preparing his own exit. While I had been building mine, he had been building his. He had simply started later and been less careful. He was planning to leave, I said. The evidence suggests he was at least preparing for the possibility, Diana said. The transfers began approximately 4 months into the affair. 4 months into the affair. 10 months before the Tuesday evening in October when I had found the emails. For 10 months, he had been both conducting an affair and quietly moving money. For 10 months, I had been living in a house with a man who was doing 2 things I did not know about simultaneously. The chicken marsala felt, in retrospect, like the least I had gotten away with. Does this change our position? I asked. Diana looked at me steadily. It strengthens it considerably. Month 5, the personal architecture. I had spent 4 months building the legal and financial case. Month 5 was about building the personal infrastructure of the life I was walking toward. I found an apartment. Not a transitional space, a real apartment, the kind you choose rather than settle for. 2 bedrooms in a building near the Dilworth neighborhood, good light, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. I put down a deposit in my own name. I arranged for utilities. I had new furniture picked out and ready to be ordered. I told no one except my mother and Diana. Callum noticed nothing. He was home for dinner 4 nights out of 7. He suggested, in month 5, that we repaint the living room. He had opinions about the color. I told him it sounded like a great idea and that we should pick something in the spring. I felt no guilt about this particular lie. I want to be honest about that. I had spent 5 months watching a man conduct himself as though nothing was wrong while I rebuilt my entire life around him. The color conversation was the least of it. I also, in month 5, reconnected with 3 clients I had stepped back from during the marriage. I had not told them I was rebuilding my practice, I simply reached out, re-established contact, expressed genuine interest in their current work. 2 responded with immediate engagement. 1 became a substantial new project. By the end of month 5, my independent income was 20% higher than it had been 6 months earlier. I was not leaving a marriage to struggle. I was leaving a marriage to land. Month 6. The last month was about completion, making sure every thread was in place before Diana filed. Final review of the asset documentation. Final review of the affair evidence. Confirmation of the apartment lease. Coordination with Greta Park on the financial forensics report, which was now 43 pages and documented the account I had not known about and the 18 months of transfers into it. Diana told me, in our final preparatory meeting, that this was one of the most comprehensively prepared cases she had handled. Most clients come to me after, she said. they find out, they react, they call me in the middle of that reaction. By the time we get to the financial picture, it's already been disturbed, accounts accessed, assets moved, the clean record compromised. I needed time, I said. You used it exceptionally well. I asked her, what does he know? Nothing, she said. He has no indication this is coming. I thought about that Tuesday evening in October. The chicken marsala. The candles. The wine he preferred. The smile I had maintained across 6 months of ordinary evenings and weekend plans and a conversation about paint colors. Good, I said. We filed on a Monday morning. Diana had arranged for the filing and service to happen simultaneously, meaning that the moment the petition was filed with the court, a process server was dispatched to Callum's office. He would be served at his desk, in front of colleagues, in the middle of a Tuesday he had had no particular reason to anticipate. I was at the apartment I had leased 3 weeks earlier, surrounded by the furniture I had ordered, drinking coffee I had made in my own kitchen, when Diana called to confirm the filing. It's done, she said. I sat with that for a moment. 6 months of Tuesday evenings and Friday dinners and Saturday mornings. 6 months of the discipline required to maintain a performance without becoming lost in it. 6 months of building, quietly and completely, a life that would be waiting for me when I was ready to step into it. Thank you, I said. You did the work, Diana said. I finished my coffee. I had a client call in 40 minutes. I had files to review and a forensic accounting report to cross-reference and a new chapter of my professional life that had been quietly expanding for weeks. I opened my laptop. And I got to work. I want to tell you what Callum's reaction was, because I think it is instructive. He called me at 11:47 that Tuesday morning. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 18 seconds long and consisted primarily of my name, said 3 times, with an increasing register of disbelief. He called again at 12:03. I let that one go too. His attorney contacted Diana's office at 2 in the afternoon. Diana told me later that the opposing counsel's first question was about the forensic accounting report, specifically, how we had documented the transfers from the joint account. She said the attorney sounded as though he had been given an incomplete briefing by his client. Callum had not told his own attorney about the money he had moved. Which meant his attorney was discovering the forensic accounting report at the same time Callum was discovering that we had it. Which meant that on the day he was served with divorce papers, Callum Bishop was managing 2 simultaneous revelations, that his wife had known about the affair, and that we had documented what he had done with the money. I try not to take satisfaction in the specific shape of that Tuesday. I try, and I succeed approximately 80% of the time. The other 20% I give myself grace about. The divorce took 11 months to finalize. It was contested. Callum had attorneys and positions and a version of events he wished to establish. What he did not have was documentation that competed with mine. The at-fault determination, supported by the evidence Diana and I had built, affected the asset division in ways that the law prescribes when infidelity is documented. The $68,000 he had moved was traced and addressed in the settlement. The house was sold, my preferred outcome, because I had no interest in remaining in it and considerable interest in its equity. The investment accounts were divided according to a formula that Greta Park's forensic report supported and that Callum's attorney was not in a position to effectively challenge. I am not going to give you the final settlement numbers because some of what was agreed to is confidential. What I will tell you is that I walked out of that marriage with what I had built during it fairly accounted for, what had been taken from it documented and addressed, and the independent financial position I had spent 6 months constructing fully intact. I walked out clean. I walked out ready. I walked out into the apartment I had chosen and the clients I had rebuilt and the life I had been designing since the Tuesday evening in October when I closed a browser tab and went downstairs to make chicken marsala. I want to talk about the performance. Because I know what people wonder when I tell this story. They want to know how I did it. How I sat across from him at dinner, every evening, for 6 months, knowing what I knew. How I smiled. How I maintained the ordinary texture of a marriage from the inside while dismantling it from the outside. I will not pretend it was easy or that it left no marks. There were nights, more than I will count here, when I lay in the dark beside him and felt the weight of what I was carrying. Not grief for him exactly. Grief for the version of the marriage I had believed I was in. Grief for the years of it. Grief for the decisions I had made, the clients I had stepped back from, the trips I had not taken, the professional contractions I had accepted, in service of a partnership that had been, for at least a third of its duration, a fiction on his side. There were moments when the discipline required to maintain the performance felt like a cost I wasn't sure I could continue paying. Moments when I wanted to put it down, to be seen, to have someone in that house know what I actually knew. What got me through those moments was not rage and not the specific outcome I was building toward. What got me through was the practice I had established in month 1, the daily accounting. The morning question, is this still the right decision? It was always yes. Because the alternative, reacting before I was ready, walking into Diana's office with grief and evidence and no financial preparation, filing before the forensic accounting was complete, leaving before the apartment was leased, was a version of leaving that would have cost me significantly more than 6 months of Tuesday dinners. I have worked in finance long enough to understand that the worst decisions are made under emotional pressure on incomplete information. I refused to make a decision that important under those conditions. I waited until the information was complete. Then I acted. My mother drove up from Savannah the week after I filed. She brought 2 bottles of the champagne she kept for significant occasions and a casserole she had made that morning, and she sat in my new apartment and looked around at the space I had built for myself, and she cried. Not sad tears. The other kind. We ate the casserole and drank the champagne, and she told me about every woman in our family who had done something hard and done it well, the way she had always told those stories, not as cautionary tales but as evidence. Evidence of what the women in our family were capable of when they decided that capable was what they were going to be. Your grandmother would be so proud, she said. She would have started building 6 months earlier, I said. My mother laughed. The real kind. The kind that had lived through things and was still capable of laughter. Probably 8, she said. Here's what I know now that I want you to know. The period after discovering a betrayal is the most dangerous period for decision-making. The emotional pressure is at its highest. The information is at its most incomplete. The instinct to act is exactly when action is most likely to be costly. That does not mean wait forever. It means wait long enough. Long enough to find an attorney before you need one urgently. Long enough to understand the full financial picture before any of it can be altered. Long enough to build independent financial stability before you depend on it. Long enough to document what needs to be documented while it is still fully documentable. I am a financial consultant. My specialty is liquidity analysis, understanding the real, accessible, usable position of an entity as opposed to what its surface suggests. I applied that specialty to my own life on a Tuesday evening in October, and I gave myself 6 months to make sure I understood the real picture before I acted on it. It was the most important financial analysis I have ever done. It was also the most personal. I am 40 years old. I live in an apartment in Dilworth with good light and a kitchen I have cooked in every evening for the past 14 months, and a consulting practice that is the strongest it has ever been. I do not have a version of the last 4 years I am entirely at peace with. That is honest. There are things I wish I had known sooner and things I wish I had done differently, and a version of those years when I was in it that I still sometimes mourn for the woman who believed it was what she thought it was. But I have a version of the last 6 months of those years that I am completely at peace with. I had information. I took time. I built what I needed. I acted when I was ready. I left clean. There is a significant difference between leaving and leaving well. Leaving is easy. Any moment of sufficient pain can produce leaving. Leaving well requires something more than pain. It requires patience and information and the willingness to sit inside discomfort long enough to convert it into structure. I sat inside it for 6 months. What came out the other side was mine. Completely, cleanly, unambiguously mine. And that has made every dinner I have cooked in my own kitchen since, unhurried, unperformed, just mine, the best meal I have ever made. Thank you for being here with me through every word of this. If it gave you something, a framework, a reminder, a way of thinking about a hard situation you may be navigating, then I am glad I told it. More stories are waiting on your screen right now. Click 1. I will meet you there.